we've got to find things that can spin up quickly, that are affordable, that we can put on the grid.
Now on Crossroads Politics, the race to make more electricity, but the potential solutions are sparking debate. We're going to plug into the arguments over new nuclear technology. Plus, more executive orders from abortion to healthcare costs, the new mandates coming from Governor Braun this week with the swipe of his pen. Welcome to this week's Crossroads Politics here on WTHR Plus. Great to have you with us. I'm Dustin Grove. In just a moment, we're going to bring in the editor of the Capitol Chronicle, our good friend Nikki Kelly. But first, let's get to those executive orders. State House reporter Emily Longnecker joins us from the State House. Emily, let's start with the one dealing with abortion. It got a lot of attention.
Yeah, it sure did, Dustin. This is the order that calls on the Indiana Department of Health to release those individual terminated pregnancy reports, something it did before the state's near total abortion ban went into effect. Under the current law, within 30 days of providing an abortion, doctors must complete a terminated pregnancy report and send it to the Indiana Department of Health. That report includes information like the patient's age, where they live, and what they do for work. When the number of abortions started going down with the near total ban, the Department of Health stopped sharing individual reports, instead releasing quarterly data on abortions performed across the state. Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita disagreed with that move. Governor Braun said signing the executive order was enforcing the law already on the books when it comes to the AG's position on releasing individual reports.
I'm going to let them work that out. What they're doing to me is okay because it's in the spirit of trying to make our law enforced in a way that it was intended to be worked out. Thank you so much.
Leading Democrats released statements on this order. House Democratic Minority Leader Phil Gianquenta said in part, quote, "This executive order is cruel and unbefitting of our state, and I appreciated Governor Holcomb's small government approach to this issue. We don't need to put women through more pain than they've already been through." Democratic Senate Minority Leader Shelley Yoder also released a statement which said in part, quote, "This executive order isn't about protecting life, it's about control. The governor is putting families in harm's way and undermining the freedoms Hoosiers hold dear." So strong words from Democratic lawmakers there. Indiana's Right to Life also issued a statement supporting the executive order, saying that it puts abortion providers in the state on notice that there is no tolerance in Indiana for illegal abortions. Dustin?
And Emily, this was one of several executive orders the governor signed this week, right?
Yeah, that's right. There was also several other executive orders that focused on reducing health care costs. Most of these other executive orders ask state agencies to look at the numbers and costs and at their programs that help reduce health care risks. He also wants an audit of nonprofit hospitals to compare what they charge to their tax savings. Last week, we talked about how House Republicans want to pressure nonprofit hospitals to lower prices. This week, the Senate also took a look at restricting prior authorizations and ending non-competes for doctors. But both of those bills had a lot of support from doctors who testified on their behalf. So, Dustin, that push for lowering health care costs from the governor on down shows no signs of slowing down at this point.
It sure doesn't, Emily. Thank you. Stay right there. We're going to come back to you in just a minute. But right now, I want to bring in Nikki Kelly from the Indiana Capitol Chronicle. Governor Braun, he ran on kitchen table issues. He's a dollars and cents guy, former business owner, wanted to focus on the economy, healthcare costs. And now we're seeing these executive orders, the DEI elimination last week, this latest one on abortion. Does that surprise you in any way?
Not really. He's still a solid core conservative Republican in Indiana. So some of this stuff is definitely going to come. And the first week of any governor's, tenure is going to be spent on executive orders like this. The abortion one is intriguing because a lot, if you read the actual words, it doesn't say release the TPRs, it says follow the law. But that's the problem. The law is in question, not the law of filing them. All the providers are filing them, but the law of whether it's a public record. And that's something you and I deal with on a daily basis, right? And in the past, the state viewed them as a public record and they would redact the private information to protect the woman. But when we drop down to, like 10 or 12 of these a quarter, they said, whoa, you can basically figure out who these women are now with so few of them. And that's what the court hearing, there was lawsuit, and the lawsuit said, yeah, we find these to be medical documents, which are an exception to public records law. So that law is still in question.
And that's why we heard the governor there say, well, we'll let the attorney general handle that part of it.
Well, which is funny because the attorney general came out and called the State Department of Health out, but technically his office has to defend them in that lawsuit. And they did hire an outside attorney to defend the department. The department won the first round, and now the anti-abortion groups are filing for an appeal. And I also want people to know these records that they want, what they're really looking for is the doctors' names. That's the thing that they're not getting in the aggregate numbers. And so what they would do in the past is they would compare, okay, was this filed 31 days after, or if it's someone who's under a certain age, was this filed 4 days after when it's supposed to be filed 3 days after? And then they will file complaints with the medical licensing board saying they're not following the law. But without the doctor's name, they can't file those kinds of complaints.
And executive orders, we should reiterate, are, I mean, it's dependent upon who the governor is. They're not permanent. We could have another governor do, because that's what we're seeing right now at the national level with President Trump reversing a lot of what President Biden had done. You've got to have legislation on the books to make it permanent. Have you heard any rumblings about abortion?
Oh, there are several bills filed this year on the terminated pregnancy report issue, and so we'll see if those get heard.
Turning to healthcare, we know this is an uphill climb, healthcare costs, specifically lowering hospital costs. Do you think that there's any more traction this session with doctors now kind of coming on board with some of these lawmakers and saying, yes, we need to do something to lower hospital health care?
Well, the doctors are really on board for the prior authorization bill because, and you know, we've all been there and had to get additional agreement to let us get that test or that drug or whatever. The irony is that prior authorization is one of the few things that probably keeps costs down, right? Because this is insurance companies saying, no, you don't need that yet. Let's try this instead. Let's, you know, we think that's going a little too fast. That's an unnecessary procedure. So that's the irony on prior authorization and why it got stopped last year. Now there's some other bills out there that can definitely help, and I do see a lot of doctors coming on board with those.
Okay. All right. We'll continue to follow that part of it. Thank you. Still ahead here on Crossroads Politics, the debate over immigration heads straight to the Hoosier State.
To give a green light for racial profiling.
A new bill would make police report any suspected undocumented people to immigration authorities. Why activists are worried about how that would be carried out. Plus, the growing cost of electricity is sparking a debate over how to fix it. Should Indiana go nuclear? We'll hear from both sides still ahead here on Crossroads Politics. Welcome back to Crossroads Politics on WTHR Plus. I'm Dustin Grove. Indiana is more than 1,000 miles from the southern U.S. border, but the immigration battle has arrived at the State House here in Indianapolis. Our Emily Longnecker was there as lawmakers debated putting Indiana police on the front lines, essentially, of this immigration battle. Emily, explain this.
Yeah, you know, Dustin, the debate has certainly arrived here at the Indiana State House. You know, we know President Donald Trump signed that executive order calling on local and state law enforcement to cooperate with ICE when it comes to enforcing federal immigration laws. Supporter of this bill, 1393, say it gives guidance to local police on how to do that. Those against it say it racially profiles immigrant communities. Under House Bill 1393, if a police officer arrests and charges someone for a misdemeanor or felony and has probable cause to believe that person is undocumented because they don't have identification showing otherwise, that officer is required to tell the county sheriff, who then is required to let ICE know. Here's the bill's author, Republican Representative Garrett Boscom, speaking on it.
The determination is not made just based off of pulling a person off the street. The determination is only made after an individual has been arrested for that felony or misdemeanor. When you're arrested.
And during this debate, one citizen came in to the committee that was discussing this bill and spoke in support of it. Take a listen.
Even if you don't support the bill, why would you want a criminal or maybe a violent alien to be released back into your community? It doesn't make any sense to me. So I wholeheartedly support the bill. And
Others who testified against 1393 said it would lead to immigrants, regardless of their status, being targeted for how they look and sound. Others called this bill racist.
We can say all we want that it is not based on race, but we know that the majority of people in this country associate undocumented status with people who look like me and who are darker. And so this is going to give a green light for racial profiling. It is going to stigmatize our community even further and cause irreparable harm.
When you're arrested as a white individual, no one is going to suspect that you shouldn't live here. I mean, I'm sure there are people in this room who have been arrested for small misdemeanor charges in this country, and they have never been asked about their legal status because they have skin that looks like mine and like many of the people around this table.
Republican Representative Jim Lucas, who supports this bill, acknowledged that this is an emotional and difficult issue. Take a listen.
My heart goes out to those people that aren't here legally and came from a place just to get away from it. But after years and years and years of horrible federal immigration policy, the states have to deal with this. It's not just the states, it's the local communities that are suffering under the pressure of the open border policy of the past 4 years.
Now, some who spoke out against this bill acknowledged that immigration, the issue of it, needs to be addressed, but said the way to do that was to provide a path to citizenship for the folks who are already here living in this community who are undocumented. Dustin?
Boy, you said it, Emily. A lot of passionate feelings on both sides of this issue. And we should point out this push on undocumented immigrants is not just on police, it's in the classroom potentially too, right?
Yeah, you know, there are a couple bills focused on how school districts deal with the undocumented population. House Bill 1394 would require schools to track the number of students they think are undocumented and report that to the state. It would also give districts permission to deny enrollment to students if they had reason to believe those students were undocumented. But activists say that would be illegal. Rachel Van Tile, the director of legal services at Exodus Refugee Immigration, said, quote, the Supreme Court has already ruled on this on Plyler versus Doe. A child, regardless of immigration status, is entitled to an education in the United States. Van Tile said she thinks the message of that ruling is something that Hoosiers valued. That bill is set to go before the Education Committee, but has not been scheduled yet for a vote. Dustin?
All right, Emily, thank you. I want to bring in Nikki Kelly with the Capitol Chronicle again. Governor Braun campaigned on the immigration issue. Is this how you saw this panning out? Yeah, I mean, I figured obviously this is a state legislature bill, so, but they're going to try to get at this topic in any way they can, and having local police basically, you know, enforce immigration law or start to help enforce immigration law is where they're going to begin. So I'm not too surprised to see the filing, and the arguments are pretty similar to ones we've seen in the past as well. I wonder, no matter what happens here, if this is going to end up in the court. Absolutely, yeah. And we were mentioning the education ruling there. But the fact is that lots of things used to be legal, right? Roe v. Wade. And so we have a different court. And some of these bills are specifically being filed in order to challenge things up through the judiciary and try to get new rulings. The Migration Police Policy Institute tracks migration and refugee trends across the globe. They estimate about 102,000 undocumented people live here in Indiana right now. More than half have been here for more than 10 years. Do you see lawmakers making any distinction for maybe people who have lived here for a long time? Has that been talked about at all? I mean, that's what you're talking about with the path to citizenship, and I think most Republicans aren't supportive of that. Okay. All right, let's talk about power now. Electricity. Ask just about anybody about their electric bill, and they're likely to tell you the same thing. It's more expensive. I put it out there on social media, which is not scientific, I know, but I just said, have you noticed your power bill go up lately? And they said, oh yeah, we have. You know, back in the early 2000s, Indiana had the 4th lowest electric costs in the country. And then you fast forward 2 decades, we're up to 29th, so about middle of the pack. Prices here are up 118%, while the national average has grown just 72%. State lawmakers say reducing energy costs is one of their key priorities, and everybody agrees we need to start making more power. We talked about that nearly a year ago when experts warned Indiana could eventually face a power shortage unless the state acts.
As Hoosiers, we can expect more generation to be built over the coming years, and we're working through how to get that done quickly.
Well, there's now a push in the State House to offer incentives for something called small modular nuclear reactors, or SMRs for short. You're going to hear a lot about that in the next couple of months. A Republican-backed priority bill would offer a 20% tax credit for manufacturers of these SMRs. And Rolls-Royce, located here in Indiana, is already working on developing one. Our partners at the Capitol Chronicle looked into this. They say these SMRs are compact. They're smaller than traditional nuclear power plants. Supporters say it's cheaper and safer than larger nuclear reactors, but critics, including the Hoosier Environmental Council, say they're concerned about safety. They're also concerned that this isn't yet fully developed and could end up costing more up front, which could then be passed on to us through our electric bills. We heard from both sides here. Should that have a future in Indiana?
I hope so. It's a whole lot less nuclear material, a whole lot less waste, a whole lot safer. They fail passive, not fail active, which means if they overheat, they shut themselves down. We've got to find things that can spin up quickly, that are affordable, that we can put on the grid. But we can't, with everything, we can't talk about onshoring industry, particularly high tech, without talking about where they're going to get the power. So we do need to find more and new ways of creating it.
We're putting these speculative investments on ratepayers. The concern is not that SMRs can't offer any benefit to our electric grid, but the way this is put forward, it's putting a lot of that burden on everyday Hoosiers, and we don't think that's a good way to be investing. There's other, faster, cheaper, better forms of energy that is carbon-free that we can be putting our emphasis on.
In a state-funded study last year, researchers said these reactors could present substantial opportunities for Indiana to meet its energy demands in the future. Right now, we get about 45% of our energy from coal, as you see right here, 38% from natural gas, and then 12% from renewable energy like wind and solar. Supporters say these SMRs are not a panacea, but just one more way for Indiana to diversify its energy portfolio, especially, Nikki, as we heard Representative Soliday say, at a time when electricity costs are rising and we're seeing increase in demand. Developers trying to attract big tech here, which of course means they need a lot more power.
Yeah, we have these massive data centers that need to come online and they need to find electricity somewhere. And so this is one of the options that lawmakers are looking at. The fact is, though, what Representative Soliday was saying right there, they're more efficient, safer, but we don't technically know any of that. No, one of these has never been built, so we've never
that's
actually.
What I was going to point out. There are no SMR sites to compare or study yet, right?
Well, or even a functioning SMR anywhere. I mean, these are plans, and we're trying to develop them. So I think the concern is that ratepayers, you and I, should we be putting the $1 billion up front to develop this new technology, and then what if it fails, then we're out $1 billion? Or should private industry be putting up the money and taking the risk? And that's sort of where they're coming at a different approach on this.
Okay, well, the vote to advance this bill to the full House is expected later this week. Of course, we'll continue to follow it. To be continued. And that does it for this week's episode of Crossroads Politics. You can watch us every Sunday of the legislative session at 10 a.m. here on WTHR+. For State House reporter Emily Longnecker, Capitol Chronicle editor Nikki Kelly, I'm Dustin Grove. We hope to see you next time.